Hello everybody, this is Carm Killed the Cat, and welcome to your 14th C++ tutorial. In this tutorial, we will be going over inheritance in classes, so let's get started. You'll notice I added two new classes. I added the enemy class and the special enemy class. So just add those classes. Remember, you go project, add class, and then C++ class, and then you just write the name of your class. So do that for both of these, and then just close this file. We don't need it anymore. Or we'll need it later, but we don't need it yet. And for now, we'll just be using enemy. So now let's add some functions to our enemy class. We can say void attack, doesn't need any parameters, and void take damage. I don't know if we'll actually be using this. And then int damage. We may not actually use the second function, but we may, so just in case. And now let's create some private variables. Oops. Private. And we'll say int health and damage. So now we have the functions and the variables that will be in the enemy class. So let's go into the constructor and we'll say health equals 100. And damage, we'll make him do 20 damage in the attack function. So again, we don't need anything in the destructor, but just leave it there. So now we can say void enemy and attack. So the attack function is not actually going to do any damage to anything. It's just going to be an example to show inheritance, so we're just going to output something. The enemy did and then we can say m damage and end line. So you can see in this function we're just outputting, I didn't include IOStream, we're just outputting that the enemy did damage. It's not actually doing any damage, but that doesn't matter for our example. We'll include IOStream. Here it is. So now let's get on to the second function. So the second function, again, we might not use this, but just in case. So void enemy take damage and int damage. So in this we're going to just say m health minus equals damage. So we're subtracting the amount of damage from the health. And then we'll say the enemy now has, and then health period, and standard endline. So that's the second function. We're just making the enemy take damage. So now let's get into inheritance. So now let's open up our special enemy class. And before we add anything to this, let me go over what inheritance is. So in inheritance, you have two or more classes, but we'll just stick with two for now. You have the child class, which in this case is our special enemy class, and we have our parent class, which is our enemy class. So in inheritance, the child class, when it's made a child of the parent class, gets all the data, all the functions, all the variables, everything from the parent class. So we can call the attack function from our special enemy class because that function is now a part of the special enemy class as well as the enemy class. We can use the health variable, the damage variable, because those are also part of our enemy class and therefore part of our special enemy class. So the child class just gets all the data from the parent class. So to make special enemy a child of the enemy class, we put a colon after the name, and actually we need to include enemy. So we'll include enemy.h, and then after we have class special enemy, the name, we put a colon, and then we say public enemy. So now our special enemy class has all the data, the functions, the variables from our enemy class. And you can put private or protected here, but I may go over that later, but I've never used that. I don't know why you would ever use it. There's really no point in it. So we'll just stay with this for now. So there's a little more setting up we have to do before we can add things to the special enemy class. So we see in our enemy class here, the health and damage variables are private. So what the private modifier means is that only this class can access it. So even inherited classes can't access it. So if we want variables that inherited classes can access, but the rest of the program can't access, then we use a new modifier called protected. I think I mentioned this in the first class tutorial, but I didn't actually go over what it did. So now we have these variables as protected. So now we can use them in our special enemy class. So let's add some more functions to our child class here. We'll say void special attack, and I think that's all we need. And we don't need to add any variables because the only variables we'll be using are the health and damage that we get from the enemy class. So let's build this, make sure it works. Yep. And now we'll fill in the constructor, and you do actually need to make a separate constructor. So we'll say health equals 200 because he's a special enemy, so he should have more health than the normal enemy. And then damage, we'll give him more damage too because he's a special enemy. And even if you want the constructor to be the same as the parent class's constructor, you do need to put something in this constructor. If you just want to copy the parent class's constructor, you just do the parent class's name and then 2 colons and then the name of the constructor. And then if there's any parameters, you put them in here and semicolon. So that's how you call the parent class's constructor. You can do that from here. I said in the first class tutorial that you could never call the constructor separately. You can do that here. But we want our constructor to be different, so we put this here. And once again, no destructor. So now let's add our new function. So special enemy attack, or special attack. And we can just copy this. Control C and V. And we'll say the special enemy did that amount of damage. Just to show that it's different. We're still not doing any actual damage to anything in this function, but we're just showing that it's different. So these are all the functions. So now let's go into our main function and show how this works. Alright, so now in our main function, we can get rid of all this player stuff. And instead, we need to include enemy. So include enemy. Actually, we can just include special enemy because enemy is included in the special enemy file. So we don't need to include enemy itself, we just need to include special enemy. So now let's create an enemy. We'll call him E1. And then we can create a special enemy and call him E2. So now let's call the two classes functions. So we'll say E1 dot, and we see we have attack and take damage. So we'll call attack, and then we'll say E2 dot, and here we have attack, special attack, and take damage. So we have the attack and take damage functions from the enemy.h files, or enemy file, and then we have special attack from the special enemy file. So we'll call E2.specialattack, and then you can call E1.takedamage. Oops. E1.takedamage and E2.takedamage. And we need the parameters in here, so we'll make them both take 20 damage. So now let's run this. and we have the enemy did 20 damage, and the special enemy did 40 damage. So you can see those functions are different. And here, it says the enemy now has 80 health, and the enemy now has 180 health. And the reason that's different is because in our normal enemy class, we set the damage, or the health to 100 in the constructor, and in the special enemy class, we set the health to 180. So those are different. But, as you can see, we never actually define the take damage function in the special enemy file, but we can still use it. The special enemy can still use it when you're using it. So we got all the functions, all the variables and everything from the enemy class. So that's all for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will be going over how to override functions from a parent class in the child class. So see you in the next tutorial.